She kept a small glass jar on the windowsill above the kitchen sink. Dark amber, almost the color of old tea. It sat there every summer between the dish soap and the potted basil. As a child visiting her garden, I never thought to ask what was in it. It was just part of her kitchen, the way the cast iron skillet was part of her stove, and the seed tin was part of her pantry shelf. I never thought to ask because the garden was always fine. More than fine. Her tomatoes were the kind neighbors walked over uninvited to stand in front of. Heavy, deep red, splitting at the seam from their own weight. Her peppers bent the stems they hung from. Her eggplants were the size of small footballs by late July. And she never once, in all the years I watched her garden, lost a plant to blossom end rot. Not one. Not a single tomato with that ugly black sunken patch at the bottom that ruins a fruit before it ever gets a chance to ripen. I lost 4 plants to it last summer. I had spent more on fertilizer this season than I care to admit. I had driven to the garden center 3 times, come home with bottles and bags, read every label, followed every direction, and still watched fruit after fruit develop that dark, soft rot at the base and drop into the grass before I could pick them. And somewhere in August, standing in that garden with a handful of ruined tomatoes, I finally thought to ask, what was in that jar? The answer was sitting in my kitchen the whole time. 2 things, to be exact. Things I had been throwing away every single morning without a second thought. A banana peel and a handful of eggshells. That is it. That is the whole secret. And once I understood why it works, not just that it works, but the actual biology behind it, I understood something much larger about the way a garden feeds itself, and the way the fertilizer industry has very quietly taught all of us to forget it. The jar on my grandmother's windowsill was not a folk remedy. It was not superstition. It was a delivery system for 2 of the 3 nutrients a tomato plant needs most desperately by the time July arrives: potassium and calcium. Most home gardeners spend entire seasons deficient in both without ever knowing it. And the reason they stay deficient is not because those nutrients are hard to find. It is because they never learn to look in the right place. Potassium is the mineral that drives everything visible about a tomato plant in peak season. It controls how water moves through the cells. It regulates the opening and closing of the tiny pores in the leaves where gas exchange happens. It fuels the process of loading sugars into developing fruit. A tomato plant running low on potassium does not produce fruit that is too small or too light. It produces fruit with skins too thin to hold together under the pressure of ripening. Fruit that cracks and splits in the heat of August. Or worse, it stops setting fruit altogether, dropping flowers before pollination can occur, and leaving a plant that looks healthy from a distance but produces almost nothing. Blossom drop. Every gardener who has spent a summer staring at a tomato vine covered in yellow flowers that fall to the ground before a single fruit appears knows exactly what potassium deficiency looks like from the outside. They rarely know what it is called. And calcium is the mineral behind the problem I was facing. Blossom end rot is not a disease. It is not caused by a fungus, a pest, or a pathogen. It is caused by one thing and one thing only: a calcium shortage at the moment the fruit cells are forming. The bottom of a developing tomato, the part called the blossom end, is where the most rapid cell division is happening during the first weeks after the flower drops. Those cells need calcium to build their walls correctly. Without it, the cell walls collapse. The tissue dies before the fruit has any chance to mature, leaving that black, leathery patch that signals failure before the season even ends. Spray calcium on the leaves. That is what the garden center will tell most people. Buy a bottle of liquid calcium, spray the foliage. It is good advice, as far as it goes, but it treats the symptom, not the cause. The cause is almost always in the soil itself. Not a shortage of calcium on the planet, but a shortage of available plant-ready calcium in the root zone where the tomato can actually drink it. And that is exactly what a banana peel and a crushed eggshell steeped together in warm water for 4 to 5 days deliver with almost nothing else involved. Here is what happens inside that jar. A banana peel is not garbage. Before it goes dark and soft on the counter, it is holding more potassium by weight than most commercial potassium fertilizers contain by volume. A single banana peel carries between 35 and 40% potassium in its dry matter. It also holds measurable amounts of phosphorus, magnesium, and calcium. All of it locked inside the fiber of the peel in forms the plant cannot use directly. The transformation happens in water. Submerged in a quart of warm water and left to steep, the cellular walls of the peel begin to break down slowly. The minerals inside, already partially pre-digested by the fermentation that begins within the first 24 hours, start crossing over into the liquid. By day 2, the water has color. By day 4, it smells faintly sour, which is not a sign of rot. It is the signature of lactic acid bacteria doing exactly what they are supposed to do, breaking the organic compounds in the peel down into forms that a plant root can absorb on contact. That is the same biological process behind fermented rice water, behind the liquid from a sauerkraut jar, behind every traditional preparation our great-grandparents added to their kitchen gardens for centuries before the word fertilizer was ever printed on a bag. The eggshell works through a different mechanism, but toward the same goal. Calcium carbonate is the primary compound in an eggshell, making up roughly 94% of the shell's dry weight. In its whole form, an eggshell takes months to break down in soil. The calcium stays locked inside the crystalline structure of the carbonate and releases too slowly to help a plant in active fruit production. The key is surface area. The more surface area exposed to water, the faster the calcium carbonate dissolves and enters the liquid. A crushed eggshell, ground fine enough to feel almost like powder between the fingers, releases calcium into the steeping water within 48 hours. A whole eggshell sitting in the same jar for the same amount of time releases almost nothing measurable. This is the detail my grandmother knew without ever having read a soil science paper. The shells in her jar were always powder. She used the back of a wooden spoon to crush them in a bowl before they went into the water. I watched her do it dozens of times without understanding why, until I read a paper from the Journal of Plant Nutrition that documented the dramatic difference in calcium availability between whole shell and fine ground shell in a liquid extraction test. She did not need the paper. She already knew. The recipe that comes from her windowsill jar, now running in my own kitchen every summer, is disarmingly simple. 3 to 4 banana peels. The riper the better, because a riper peel has a higher concentration of readily soluble potassium. A small handful of eggshells, 6 to 8 whole eggs worth, crushed to a coarse powder. 1 quart of warm water, not hot enough to kill the beneficial microbes that begin the fermentation process, but warm enough to encourage it. Everything goes into a glass jar, covered loosely with a cloth or a paper towel held down with a rubber band, and left in a warm corner of the kitchen away from direct light for 4 to 5 days. The cloth cover matters. It keeps out dust and insects while allowing the carbon dioxide produced during fermentation to escape safely. A sealed lid on a fermenting jar can build pressure. Glass does not forgive that kind of mistake. On day 4 or 5, the liquid will be dark, brownish amber, and will carry a faint sour smell. That smell is the confirmation the brew is ready. The banana fibers will have turned almost colorless, their mineral content largely transferred into the liquid. The eggshell pieces will have softened noticeably at the edges, where the calcium is leaving the shell and entering the water. Strain the liquid through a fine mesh strainer or a piece of cheesecloth into a second jar. The solids that remain can go directly into a compost pile or be dug shallow into a garden bed where they will continue breaking down. The liquid is the product, but it is not ready to touch the garden yet. One final and non-negotiable step: dilution. The concentrate is too dense to apply directly to a root zone without risk of chemical burn from the accumulated organic acids. The dilution ratio is 1 part concentrate to 10 parts plain water. 1 cup of banana peel and eggshell tea stirred into 10 cups of water before it goes anywhere near a plant. This is the step most people skip because it feels counterintuitive. Why water it down? Because what the root needs is the mineral, not the acid that carried it. The diluted solution is the form in which the calcium and potassium cross through the root surface and enter the plant. The fermentation process was the unlocking step. The dilution is the delivery step. Without it, the organic acids in the concentrate can close the root surface against absorption, rather than opening it. The rule is simple. If the liquid touches soil, it is diluted first. No exceptions. Pour it at the base of the plant, never on the leaves. Calcium and potassium are root zone nutrients. They enter through the root hair cells in the top 6 inches of soil and travel upward through the plant's vascular system to wherever they are needed most. Foliar spraying of this mixture does almost nothing for blossom end rot or potassium deficiency at the fruit level. It needs to go into the ground. The timing across the growing season determines how much of this work actually shows up in the harvest. The most critical application window is the 2 weeks before the first flowers open. This is when the plant is building the cellular architecture it will use to produce every fruit of the season. Calcium delivered at this stage goes directly into the infrastructure. Potassium delivered at this stage primes the water regulation system that the plant will depend on through the heat of July and August. A second application, when the first small fruits appear, gives the plant a second wave of both minerals at the moment it needs them most urgently, when individual fruit cells are dividing and the demand for calcium spikes sharply. A third application in mid-August, when many home gardens start to look tired, extends the productive life of the plant through the shoulder of the season, when the difference between a September harvest and a September cleanup is often nothing more than a single feeding. 3 applications over the course of a summer is the entire program. More frequent applications risk throwing the soil pH slightly alkaline from the accumulating calcium carbonate, which can lock out other nutrients the plant needs. Fewer than 3 misses the moments when the minerals would have made the largest visible difference. And here is the mistake that ruins most first attempts with this method. The eggshells are not crushed finely enough. A half-crushed shell dropped into a jar of water releases almost no usable calcium in a 4-day steep. The shell needs to be reduced to a texture close to rough sand at minimum, closer to coarse flour at best. A mortar and pestle takes about 2 minutes. A small coffee grinder reserved for garden use takes less than 30 seconds. The difference in the finished liquid in terms of measurable calcium content between a coarse grind and a whole shell is significant enough to determine whether the brew prevents blossom end rot or does almost nothing at all. My grandmother used the back of a wooden spoon and a ceramic bowl. The sound of the shells crackling under pressure was something I heard every summer of my childhood, without ever understanding what it meant. She was not making noise, she was making medicine. There is a version of this recipe that goes further, one she used at the end of the season when the plants were heavy with fruit and flagging in the heat. 2 additional ingredients. 1 tablespoon of blackstrap molasses, not regular molasses, blackstrap, the dark bitter variety from the final boiling of sugarcane, and a tablespoon of used coffee grounds from that morning's pot. The molasses is not for the plant. It is food for microbes. Stirred into the jar before the steeping begins, it acts as a catalyst, multiplying the population of beneficial bacteria in the liquid within hours. Those bacteria break down the banana peel and eggshell compounds faster and more completely than the plain water version, collapsing a 5-day steep into 3 days and producing a significantly richer extract. The coffee grounds add a slow-release nitrogen source that complements the potassium and calcium already present, rounding out the tonic into something closer to a full-spectrum feeding. A brew made with all 4 ingredients, banana peel, eggshells, blackstrap molasses, and used coffee grounds, and steeped for 3 days, produces a liquid that addresses 3 of the primary deficiencies that cause tomato plants to underperform in the second half of summer simultaneously. It is the jar my grandmother kept on the windowsill. It is the reason I never saw a blackened tomato bottom in her garden, and it is the reason I have not seen one in mine since the summer I finally asked the right question. At the end of last season, I pulled a tomato plant that had received 3 applications of this brew over the summer. The root ball was dense, fibrous, and spread nearly twice as wide as the untreated plant next to it. The fruit had been clean, heavy, and unbroken all the way through September. No splits, no rot, no dropped flowers in July. Not a perfect season, gardens never are, but a completely different one from the summer before. The jar on my windowsill is amber dark right now, sitting between the dish soap and the potted basil, in the same spot hers always occupied. It will be ready in 2 more days. The banana peels from this week are already in it. The eggshells from breakfast are crushed and waiting. 50 years of gardening wisdom, 2 kitchen scraps, and 1 small glass jar. The answer was never at the garden center. It was always here. If this is the kind of patient-rooted knowledge that brought you to this channel, the like button and the subscribe bell keep this work going at Rooted Grace. Leave a comment below telling me the one problem your tomato plants give you every summer. Splits, blossom drop, end rot, slow ripening, name it, and the next video in this series will go straight to the cause. There is one more piece of this puzzle, a 3rd ingredient from the breakfast table that addresses the deficiency that caused those plants to flag in August in the first place. That one is coming next week. Until then, keep the jar on the windowsill. The garden is already waiting.